And thank you very much for joining me here today. I'm Don Ma. I appreciate you tuning in. To start off, let's talk about China. For anyone who's been following China news for a while, they know that the country is very reluctant to acknowledge anything that is wrong with its economy, the country overall, or anything else. But now it seems like China has no choice but to acknowledge that its property sector is in trouble. And I say this because the country will make its biggest cut ever to a key mortgage rate as it scrambles, of course, to revive its ailing property market. The People's Bank of China announced that it would cut its 5-year loan prime rate by 25 basis points to 3.95%. This rate usually serves as a reference for mortgages. China's economy relies heavily on the property sector, so the fact that it's seeing trouble is significant. And this trouble has caused a downturn in the economy. And that came in 2021 when Beijing cracked down on developers' borrowing, which triggered defaults on debts. Now, the deeper than expected cuts to mortgage rates suggest that Beijing right now is not focused about the potential negative impacts of lower lending rates on currency or banks, or maybe it thinks that this is the lesser evil. Now, there was a muted reaction to the announcement in the markets, with the benchmark index Shanghai Composite gaining less than 0.5%. And moving on, HSBC Holdings reported a 78% jump in full-year profit, a record high gain on interest rates, but missed forecast as it was hit by a hefty impairment from its stake in a Chinese bank. Here's more on that.
HSBC profits have surged to a record, hitting just over $30 billion in 2023. That was up 78% on a year ago, but still missed analyst forecasts. Wednesday's earnings numbers show the firm was hit by a $3 billion charge over its stake in Chinese lender Bank of Communications. That followed a downbeat review of its likely future cash flows amid China's wobbly recovery. HSBC chairman Mark Tucker called the country's economic performance bumpier than expected. The news saw the bank's Hong Kong shares slide over 3% in afternoon trade. Even so, it plans to reward investors with a fresh $2 billion share buyback and says it will consider a special dividend. Staff are in line for a boost too, with the bank set to increase its bonus payouts. Chief Executive Noel Quinn saw his total remuneration almost double to $10.6 million as long-term incentives kicked in. Looking ahead, HSBC says it remains cautious about the outlook for lending this year, with many key markets still battling inflation and slow growth. The bank itself saw costs rise more than expected last year and says they'll be up sharply again in 2024.
Now on to markets. U.S. stocks ended lower on Tuesday, with the Nasdaq showing the largest decline as chipmaker Nvidia stumbled ahead of its highly awaited earnings report, while gains in Walmart kept losses on the Dow Industrials in check. Here's a quick recap of markets.
U.S. stocks fell across the board Tuesday, with the Nasdaq showing the largest declines as chipmaker Nvidia stumbled ahead of its highly awaited earnings report, while gains in Walmart kept losses on the Dow Industrials in check. The Dow slipped 0.2%, while the S&P 500 fell 0.6 and the Nasdaq dropped 0.9. Investors are concerned whether Nvidia's quarterly results, expected after markets close on Wednesday, will justify its expensive valuation and continue to fuel the buying frenzy around artificial intelligence-related stocks. Shares closed down 4%. Nvidia has become the fourth most valuable public company in the world and Wall Street's most traded stock. Walmart, however, finished 3% higher after hitting an all-time high during the trading session, as it posted strong quarterly results and gave an upbeat outlook. The latest down day on Wall Street follows a weeks-long rally that stalled last week. Hotter than expected U.S. inflation data pushed back market expectations for the timing of a rate cut from the Federal Reserve, which Retirement Planners of America CEO Ken Moraif said is what he thinks is driving the market now.
I think today is the continuing digestion and indigestion of the data that in some instances is hot and other instances is cold with regard to inflation, and whether or not the Fed is going to lower interest rates, or maybe now they're going to raise interest rates. So all this confusion about these conflicting data points, I think, is causing some people to take some profits and wait and see.
The next rate cut is expected in June, according to a slim majority of economists polled by Reuters, who also flagged risk of a further delay in the first cut.
Now, you've likely heard about the news of Capital One's bid for Discover Financial, but it could be a big blow to Visa and MasterCard's dominance if the deal clears a stiff antitrust review. $35 billion all-stock deal would give Capital One access to Discover's network of payment processing. Capital One would no longer have to rely on Visa and MasterCard, who have both been criticized for the fees they charge for processing payments. Now, the deal is expected to face tough scrutiny from the Biden administration. Together, the company will be the top player in the market industry. Capital One's CEO said the merger was well-positioned, though, for regulatory approvals. Meanwhile, Walmart kicked off U.S. retailers reporting on Tuesday with robust fourth-quarter results after inflation-squeezed shoppers flocked to its stores. And Walmart also said it's going to buy smart TV maker Vizio for $2.3 billion. Take a look at this.
Walmart on Tuesday reported strong profit and sales in its fourth quarter ending in late January, after inflation-squeezed shoppers flocked to its stores. It also gave an upbeat sales forecast for the next 12 months and confirmed a report that it would buy smart TV maker Vizio for $2.3 billion. Walmart's stock rose 6% to an all-time high during morning trading. The retail giant announced a 9% jump in its dividend, the biggest increase in more than a decade. Analysts say Walmart has benefited from its focus on groceries and keeping these prices low as consumers deal with high prices elsewhere. While the company continues to spruce up its massive stores, expand its selection of online merchandise, and offer more pickup and delivery options. CEO Doug McMillon said it passed $100 billion in global e-commerce sales in 2023 for the first time. Walmart's proposed offer to buy Vizio for $11.50 per share in cash is another bet on the retailer's fast-growing U.S. advertising business. Analysts say it could help it build out a vast panel of connected TV users through owning and operating Vizio Smart TVs and Vizio's SmartCast operating system, giving it more space to sell advertisements. In the fourth quarter, ad sales rose 22% and are a bigger margin driver than its traditional grocery business. Vizio's shares rose as much as 15% in morning trading to around $11 each. They were trading below $8 the day before reports of deal talks emerged.
And chipmaker Nvidia seems like has left Tesla in the dust on Wall Street as it raced to the top spot as the most traded stock. On average, about $30 billion worth of Nvidia shares changed hands daily compared to about $22 billion for Tesla during the same time period. Nvidia controls about 80% of the high-end AI chip market and last week became the third most valuable U.S. company. There are concerns, however, the Wall Street rally over artificial intelligence could be vulnerable and punctured if the chipmaker fails to meet investors' high expectations. Meanwhile, Amazon is set to join the Dow Jones Industrial Average, replacing Walgreens, effective next week. This is according to S&P Dow Jones Indices. Here are the details.
Amazon is set to join the Dow Jones Stock Index. Adding the e-commerce titan will increase the Dow's exposure to retail and other market areas. Amazon is also a massive player in cloud computing, entertainment, and much more. One analyst said Tuesday's news tallied with the Dow's mission to represent commerce across the US. The move will likely matter most to retail investors, many of whom tend to follow that index. Institutional investors generally keep a closer eye on the broader S&P 500. Amazon will replace Walgreens Boots Alliance from next week. Shares in the drugstore operator fell 3% in after-hours trade following the news. Amazon shares gained over 1%. Its addition to the Dow is the first adjustment to the index since 2020, when Salesforce, Amgen and Honeywell all joined. ExxonMobil, Pfizer and Raytheon were ousted at that time. In another move announced Tuesday, Uber will join the Dow's Transportation Index, replacing JetBlue.
The first person to get a brain chip implant from startup Neuralink can now use thoughts to control a computer. Founder Elon Musk said that the patient has fully recovered and shared the progress on his social media platform X. Musk said the person is able to control a computer mouse with his or her thoughts, and the goal here is to get as many clicks from the patient as possible. Neuralink successfully implanted a chip on its first human last month after getting approval in September. Seems like gambling is paying off in a big way in the United States. The American Gambling Association says people spent a record $66.5 billion on commercial gaming last year. That is $6 billion higher than in 2022, and it includes money spent at casinos, sports betting, and online gaming sites. Now, the Gaming Association says the industry's revenue is helping the company. The money spent generated more than $14 billion for state and local taxes. That also was a record amount last year and was up nearly 10% from 2022. And air travel is flying high in 2024. The upcoming spring break season will be no exception, but sold-out flights to some destinations may surprise passengers, and some cities are eclipsing others when it comes to spring travel. Here's the details on that.
Americans are ready for spring and a break.
People are ready to take advantage of school closures and get out of cold climates and go find some warmth.
In addition to sun and fun, Christy Hudson of Expedia says they've found different destinations trending for spring 2024.
Not only are people headed to the kind of typical spring break destinations, but there's also a major event happening during the spring break window.
A total solar eclipse is set to cross North America on April 8th, and U.S. cities within the path of totality like Dallas, Indianapolis, even Cleveland expect a boost during a busy time.
That is the busiest and priciest time to fly during the spring season. You can get better rates by flying at the very beginning of March or the very end of April.
Going.com travel expert Katie Nastro also recommends flexibility since breaks and demand vary.
So say, for example, your children's spring break is end of March, but a city sort of nearby, an airport that you could sort of fly out of, their school schedule is, say, a week or two later. You can actually sort of use that to your advantage.
Nastro also says to look for best fares now.
You want to just make sure you're doing yourself a favor and just circling 21 days out from when you're looking to fly as your absolute book buy date.
And price out an itinerary with 2 one-way fares, maybe even on different airlines or to different nearby airports to see if it's cheaper than a round trip.
Farmers are protesting en masse at numerous locations in Europe, causing all kinds of disruptions. But what sparked the protest movement? Here's an explainer on that.
French farmers are causing havoc on major highways to Paris. They're protesting about a range of grievances, despite several measures announced by the government. But what are the issues, and what could the government do next? Agricultural workers in several EU nations have mounted protests. In France, farmers say they're not being paid enough and that they're being choked by excessive regulation on environmental protection. Some of their concerns, like competition from cheaper imports and environmental rules, are shared by producers in the rest of the EU. Other issues, like the food price negotiations, are France-specific. Pascal Desprez is a grain farmer.
We are here because we're honestly unhappy with the current policies in terms of agriculture. We're especially overwhelmed with norms that prevent us from working and that lower our production yields. And so we're calling on President Emmanuel Macron to put in place more realistic norms, or even remove the norms altogether. That would be great progress.
Many feel that a push by the government and retailers to bring down food inflation has left them unable to cover high costs for energy, fertilizer and transport. A government plan to phase out a tax break for farmers on diesel fuel was also a flashpoint. Discontent about unfair competition in sugar, grain and meat has also spread. Large imports from Ukraine, for which the EU has waived duties since Russia's invasion, are in part the cause of that. The The imports are resented for putting pressure on European prices, while not meeting environmental standards imposed on EU farmers. Philippe Chalmin of Paris Dauphine University is an economist specialising in commodity markets.
There is first a question of revenue, and it's clear that French farmers don't earn much. Second, and this is very French, this is the accumulation of rules, of norms, of everything that the farmers have now to comply with. And third, kind of a reaction against what you would call agri-bashing by town citizens, consumers, who at the same time want to have more natural products, more products coming directly from the farm, etc., but who are not really ready to pay for them.
Farmers take issue with EU subsidy rules, such as an incoming requirement to leave 4% of farmland fallow, and what they see as France's overcomplicated implementation of EU policy, such as in restoring hedges. Green policies are also seen as contradicting goals to become more self-sufficient in production of food and other essential goods, in light of the Ukraine war. Disagreements over irrigation projects and criticism about animal welfare and pesticides have heightened feelings among an ageing French farmer population of being disregarded by society. Time is ticking for the government, which is under pressure to defuse the crisis ahead of June elections and the annual Paris Farm Show in late February. Prime Minister Gabriel Attal announced the scrapping of diesel tax increases for farmers on January 26. He also aims to reduce red tape and offered extra aid to some groups of farmers. Initial announcements drew mixed reactions, and farmers' unions have called for protests to continue. The French government has so far been tolerant towards protesters, despite some violent incidents. But it has ordered police to protect Paris's airports and the wholesale food market, after calls for them to be targeted.
Japan plans to implement a plan to cap overtime for workers such as truckers and taxi drivers, ending a deadly problem of extreme overwork. But some say the move could upend the economy. Here's the story.
24-hour convenience stores, fresh seafood, same-day deliveries. In the world's fourth largest economy, convenience reigns king. But starting April 1st, this way of life many Japanese are used to threatens to be upended, because truck drivers in Japan will finally get a cap on overtime.
Truckers have been supporting Japan's economy for a very long time, so when the cap is implemented, it'll certainly mean all goods won't be delivered. That's what I'm most worried about.
Truckers, the lifeline of Japan's economy, deliver 90% of Japan's cargo. But the hours, long and punishing, have at times been fatal, with dozens dying from overwork each year. The government cap from April, which limits overtime hours to 80 a month for truckers, is a welcomed change. But for the trucking industry, it means fewer drivers and smaller wages.
I think the biggest concern is the salary. Even if I get to spend more time with my children, if my salary drops, it will make life difficult for us.
Once the cap is implemented, the government fears that some goods won't be delivered on time or ever transported. Without intervention, Japan could see a 14.2% decrease in delivery capacity this year, or a 34.1% drop by 2030, leading to economic losses of up to $67 billion that year alone. The 2024 problem, compounded by a shrinking population and an aging workforce, as the trucking industry loses over 15,000 drivers annually.
I think that many people are concerned about the decrease in the supply of services, so I believe that creating a workplace that is easy to work in is the key to attracting people to the industry.
Japan's trucking industry, poised to change drastically, but Japan's reliance on truckers, the heart of the country's supply chain, steadfast.
And finally, outreach workers in Mexico are urging authorities to face up to what they see as a growing fentanyl crisis, as the opioid is tightening its grip on the country that has been a major trafficking hub. This report next contains graphic images.
The fentanyl crisis has so far not swept Mexico like it has the United States, despite Mexico being a major trafficking hub for the highly addictive painkiller. But research by Reuters shows fentanyl is creeping further into Mexico now, although the scale of consumption may be clouded by a lack of data and testing. That gap in knowledge concerns Maria Elena Ramos, director of the social service organization Compañeros.
We don't have evidence of fentanyl. So this worries us a lot. Because if it passes through Mexico, some of it must end up here. And if it's on the streets, this affects people who are in difficult conditions. Homeless people, those without the means to go to emergency services.
Mexican authorities have classified fentanyl as an emerging drug because of an uptick in users seeking treatment, with related figures remaining relatively low. According to the most recent available data, opioid users made up less than 2% of the some 168,000 people who sought drug treatment in 2022. And in 2021, fewer than 24 opioid-related deaths were officially logged. Compare that to the US, where potent synthetic opioids like fentanyl cause tens of thousands of deadly overdoses per year. But Reuters has found that more than a third of Mexico's 32 states lack equipment to detect whether the drug is present in corpses. Mexican health officials have publicly acknowledged gaps in the data. The nation's Addiction Commission director, Evelinda Barron, who also oversees mental health, says it comes down to a matter of resource priority. She admits fentanyl is a concern, but insists Mexico is less predisposed to an epidemic because it does not have the same history as the US of prescription pain medication abuse and heroin consumption.
The use of fentanyl is not a public health problem now. We hope it won't be. We must bear in mind the opioid crisis started in other countries and that it had to do with the use of drugs for pain. In Mexico, fentanyl consumption takes place at border zones because of that phenomenon.
However, some researchers argue that what data they can collect point to a possible growing epidemic. Fentanyl showed up in nearly a quarter of corpses tested since June 2022 in the border town of Mexicali, according to state data. There are concerns of people consuming it unintentionally, with studies finding fentanyl cut into heroin as well as party drugs like cocaine and MDMA. And as analysts say, criminal groups are diversifying their routes. Studies show the opioid emerging further away from border areas, all the way in central regions like Mexico City. Julian Rojas, who works with Compañeros, says the authorities' dismissive attitude is a problem, especially since it means people don't have access to life-saving drugs in cases of overdoses.
Talk that in Mexico there isn't fentanyl consumption, or there's minimum level consumption. This puts the user at a greater risk as it continues to make them invisible. The government doesn't recognize the use of Naloxone as a drug to revert opioid overdoses. This puts the users of drugs that circulate on our country's streets in a more vulnerable condition.
Still, officials are sounding the alarm, including through a public information campaign warning of the powerful drug's risks. Mexico's president said in January that while fentanyl consumption was low, the country, quote, has to be careful of it, adding that he was seeking more information about its use in different states.
And thank you very much for watching NTD Business. That's all the stories today. See you soon.